want to talk about tonight. We are in Genesis chapter 2. Yay! We made it out of Genesis chapter 1 finally. We're in Genesis chapter 2. And we'll see how far we get. I really didn't plan to get very far. But anyway. Before we get into that, though, let's see. Do you remember this? Oh.
Yeah.
Remember this? We haven't looked at it for a few weeks, huh? Let's say it together a couple times. I'll take it down and we'll say it without it. All right, here we go. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. Romans 1:20. One more time. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. Romans 1:20. All right, ready? Here we go. For since the creation of the world, nature have been clearly seen, being understood. Not horrible.
That first part was like, the divine.
I have problems with the first part because I know it in various translations, since that's what messes me up with the first part. So where'd Mike go? Oh, you're sitting in a weird spot.
Well, I have to sit by him, so.
Come on, Rick. Come on. You're messing with my brain, man. You're not here long enough to do that. Before I forget, Deb Rumball gave me a note this morning, and Jim Shields has reached his period where he has to stay. So he can have visitors again. You just go and visit. But if you'd like to take him out for a time period, to go to lunch or something, you can do that. You just have to call ahead. And at this point, you call Debbie, and Debbie will take care of whoever needs to get notified in order to be able to do that. He seems to be adjusting a little bit better, and so the doctors feel that it's okay for him to begin this new phase of whatever it's going to look like. It was interesting. I was reading the introductory passage to Genesis chapter 2 in Warren Wiersbe's "Be Basic" is what Genesis says. Genesis is, those of you familiar with Wiersbe, he has a whole B series. Be this, be this, be this. And each book has its own B. For Genesis, it's "Be Basic." And he began this section with this statement, and I thought it was interesting. If you could be present to witness any event in history, what event would you choose? So now I'm asking you. If you could have been present at any event in history, what would your choice be? Can you pick two? No, you got to pick one.
I would like to be there at the resurrection.
Be at the resurrection, okay? See the first rainbow, okay. Mike?
Be out there the road to Emmaus.
We had the road to Emmaus. That's another really kind of interesting spot. Where do you want to be? Any point in history, you can pick whatever you want.
Breakfast just before the ascension.
Just before the ascension?
I want to be going up to heaven with one of those angels.
So, at some point when the angels are down here, go up with one of them? Okay. Anybody else want to say when you'd like to be? Nobody wants to say. It's too hard to choose, isn't it? Huh?
I'd like to be in my mansion.
In my mansion? Well, that's not yet history. That's future. Well, but when we consider it to God's timetable, maybe it is history.
I just see my birth, but I was there, so.
See your birth? Okay. Okay, if that's what floats your boat, man, have at it.
I think Exodus, Israel.
Israel, the whole Exodus thing, yeah, that'd be cool. They asked the same question to several pastors and leaders, and of course, some actually suggested they wanted to be there for the crucifixion. That one hit me kind of weird. I get it, but it hit me kind of weird because I'm like, yeah, but no thanks. The resurrection was high on the list. The flood, or the end of the flood, crossing the Red Sea. Someone said they'd like to see David slaying Goliath, see when the 4 Hebrew children walked out. Different New Testament things as well came out, things like when Jesus was walking on the water out to Peter, be there when the church was established and the Holy Spirit came upon them for the first time. These are all just, I mean, you start thinking about this and your brain just kind of goes, yeah, and that one, 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 and that one. But one of the guys in Wiersbe's group said, I'd like to have been present when God finished his creation. What kind of a beautiful, all-taking sight that might have been. It's interesting that there are scientists that believe that if we have the technology and the capability that we could travel out into space fast enough and far enough, we would be able to catch up with the original light beams from the past and watch history unfold before our eyes. It sounds like science fiction, but they pay millions of dollars to study this stuff. So, we can't travel that fast. We can't travel that far. So it's very much a hypothetical. But in their mind, if we could do that, we would be able to watch history unfold before our eyes in this setting. In context of what we're talking about on Sunday mornings, in 2 Peter, this world, this heavens, this earth are going to be destroyed, and we are going to get to see the new heavens and the new earth. What's that going to be like? There was an article recently about the Garden of Eden again. It comes out, it just cycles up every once in a while. We'll talk about it either next week or the week after. We'll talk about the Garden of Eden. Where was it at? Is it still around? Did God preserve it somehow with some bubble under the flood? Did it get moved during the flood, but it still exists? We'll look at all that later. We're not there yet. So as we get into this, the seventh day, it's very much different from the other 6 days of creation. Let's just get the text in here. Chapter 2, verse 1, thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their hosts. By the seventh day, God completed his work, which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. So, some differences. One is there's no introductory formula. We've been seeing then God said, then God said, then God said. That formula is no longer there. It's basically because his creative word is no longer required. It's already done. The second thing that's missing from the seventh day is we don't have the closing formula, the evening and the morning, day 7. Theologically, the missing phrase there, many scholars, I can't remember the German scholar that I was reading, starts with a K. Anyway, there's several. One of the German scholars talked about that the absence of the evening and morning, the seventh day, is that creation was intended to enjoy a perpetual rest by God that will eventually be disrupted by sin. So the idea of theologically that absence of that formula is that creation itself would be at rest, but it gets disrupted and marred by sin when sin entered the world. I don't know. That's a possibility, of course. A third thing, the seventh day is the only day that is blessed and sanctified, blessed and set apart, blessed and consecrated. 4, The number 7 is repeated 3 times in these 3 verses. That number doesn't usually, those cardinal numbers do not usually get repeated over and over again, but in this section we have the word 7th 3 different times. And the last unusual thing is the 7th day stands outside of the paired days of creation. So there was a forming and filling up to this point. Well, day 7 doesn't have that, so that's another reason there is not a corresponding day to the day 7. Day 7 is a unique day. Genesis 2 is interesting. As we get into it, we have the first Sabbath, we have the first home, we have the first covenant, and the first marriage, all in chapter 2. We've already had some first, but just in chapter 2, you're going to have the first Sabbath, the first home, first covenant, first marriage. So, as we look at this, the literary pattern helps us. Man is the pinnacle, the ultimate of creation. But central to all of this is God's at work. It starts with God before day 1, if you will, and even on day 7, who's the primary actor? God himself. So we've got this sandwich, if you will, the beginning of creation. In the beginning, God, and at the end, you have the work of God. You have God's name stated a couple of times to emphasize that. It's kind of like it begins talking about God, ends talking about God as far as Genesis chapter 2. We will talk about next week, I think it is, we're going to talk about are Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2 actually contradictory? Are they really 2 separate creation narratives, or are they the same narrative? So if you want to mull that around in your head this week, let's come back with some good conversation on. It's actually quite debated. It's surprising how much debated it is. The fact that we have this 7th thing repeated 3 times, I don't know if you ever in scripture or in Sunday school or in sermons or things you've ever heard that if God says something once, you should listen. If he says it twice, you should really listen. And if he says it 3 times, you better memorize it. It's kind of one of those things. But here we have a 3-fold repetition. So evidently by doing this, day 7 has maybe a paramount importance. Maybe it could be a good way to state it. It's some kind of pinnacle of importance. There's something bigger going on with this. Day 7 is actually, North and South Pole contrast. Polar opposites, if you want to think of it that way. Because days 1 through 6 have been filled with everything going on, and day 7 is filled with evidently nothing going on by just reading so far. There is this distinct distancing from the Asa Bara Yatzer. There's this distancing from it. The other interesting factor is that at the end of the day, humans don't understand this. Humanity doesn't. How much effort does it really take to get rest in our current culture? Think about it. Some studies say that the only country worse than America is Japan. Now, everybody in Japan have a national requirement that everybody gets 2 weeks of vacation, which not everybody gets that. But Japan's work ethic, if you want to call it that, the United States are 2 of the most busy cultures. Europe has actually a little better work ethic as far as emphasizing times of rest. Many Latin American countries, they'll have the siesta time during the day. I know when we were in Panama, it blew my mind that the whole place shut down from 11:30 to 2:30 or something like that, and then it went back. There was a stop point, everybody chilled out for a few hours. We always talk about, I just need more hours in the day. We always say that. And you know what? I don't want more hours in the day, because you know what I would do with another hour in the day? Fill it up too. even when we are attempting to rest, our rest is always interrupted. What are some interruptions that make us not rest?
Kids.
Kids, okay, what? Review, going back through stuff, yeah.
Telephone.
Telephone, I heard some.
You remember what you didn't do? See-
Oh, your list. The list, I remember I didn't do that, I gotta get that done. What else?
Doesn't that fall to kids?
What else disrupts your rest?
Going to the bathroom in the middle of.
Okay, go into the bathroom in the middle of the night. Spoken from an elder statesman who has entered into that period of life.
Your mind, there's just so much going on in that mind that it's like, you can't, it's. Doesn't shut down.
Okay, it's hard to shut the mind off. Snoring. Lucy, stop it.
Emergency, sometimes something happens.
Yeah, emergency, can't do that. It's funny, and I am not the person to talk about rest. I'll be the first person to tell you that. That is not something I am good at. The idea, the concept of rest is fully there. I get it. You have to do it sometimes. When I was younger, I used to pride myself that I could go 72 hours without sleep. And I did it back then. That ain't happening now. Yeah, for sure not happening now. I mean, I can't do it anymore. If I have to do an all-nighter or something like that, which I do periodically, I pay for it. But my mind does the same things. All the things you're describing, right down to the snoring, is part of my adventure. Bathroom, we're not there yet, Jack, but we're getting there. The idea of I'm taking a day off. Okay, what do you do on your day off normally?
Work.
Yeah, you work. You have your job, if you will. You have a day off, and then you have your other job that happens. During musical season with the kids, I do my stuff here. I take my day off, and my day off is spent over there working with the kids and working on the musical. Rest is bigger than just a day off. It's something that once you experience it at its purest form, you'll long for it again. I would say, I'll tell you this quick story. Jen and I had the privilege of going to a retreat with Broomtree Ministries. And this is a retreat for pastors. That's the only people that can go to this retreat. And it's a very, very different kind of retreat than any retreat that we've ever been to. It was at a very nice place in Michigan called The Shack. We got there. And they've got, after supper, you have a meeting with all the other pastors and staff. But everything else for those days, there's not really a scheduled thing to do unless you want to. Lunch is at a certain time, of course, because they have to do that at these resorts. But when you get there, one of the things they say is you have nothing to do. Your cell phone won't work. Your internet doesn't work. The TV only plays videos or DVDs that are provided, which are for enrichment. They're all like comedy videos and nothing like. And I thought it would be me that was going crazy. It was my wife. What do you mean I can't call the kids and check on the kids? The kids were younger on this retreat. Well, how far do we have to drive to get signal? Began to think. And it was the weirdest few days. You want to go on a walk? Go on a walk. If you want to sleep, sleep. You want to sleep in? Sleep in. It was totally designed as a refreshment type of retreat. I don't know anybody else that does these kind of retreats either. But it was stressful. It was stressful because I couldn't do anything. And I think, we are so used to going and doing. When we have that moment, it's like, I don't have anything to do. Something must be wrong. I must have forgotten something. I've got a list somewhere that I can do something on that list if I have nothing to do. So all of that is enshrined in this idea of rest. Now, the word Sabbath, it isn't found literally in this passage. Sabbath is a noun. The verb form is here. It's related to the noun form Sabbath. And so when we start to process this, we're going to get into the Sabbath rest, but we've got to stay in the text too. So the word is used about 70 times in Scripture, this idea, this verb form of Sabbath. So Shabbat is actually Sabbath, and a little different form comes in when we're talking about this rest. It's interpreted 11 times as rest, sometimes 3 times as being away, as in to go away. We would think about vacation or something like that would be the context. Interesting, it's interpreted fail twice. I didn't really understand that when I looked at it. Celebration, it's used celebrate once, and I thought, okay, well, if you actually get to rest, you're probably celebrating. That made sense to me. And then there's 7 other different minimal things, if you will. The idea is to cease, to stop, to rest. That has to be accompanied with the rest of the text to be able to discern why. The idea of stopping makes sense. The idea of resting makes sense. But the question is, why did God rest? Why did he rest? So we'll come back to that in a minute. The structure of verses 2 and 3 Hebraically creates a list of parallels. Let me show you how the 4 parallels work. So God finished the 7th day, his work in which he did. He rested on the 7th day from all his work which he did. And God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it. And because on the 7th day, or because on it, he rested from all his work which God created to do. This is a very, very literal rendering of the Hebrew text. It's just a straight, that's why it doesn't flow and sound all sentence formy and things like that. This is just a generic rendering. But you've got this 7th, 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 and it, which is the 7th. You've got these ideas. So we separate these, and so the first 7th, God finished. The second 7th, God rested. The third 7th, God blessed. And then we have a repeat that he went back and he rested from the work that he did. So we've got finished, rested, and blessed. 3 concepts wrapped around this repetition, this 7th, 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 7th thing. So it's important for us to try to see what we can gain by it. The word 7th is, it's kind of an interesting Hebrew word. Shavili is the Hebrew. It's kind of one of those fun ones to say. Some Hebrew words I don't like to say because they're too hard, but Shavili is not that hard. It represents things later in Scripture. If we're confined to this moment, we don't have these, but the 7 is often attached to covenants. The verb to swear or to make a covenant is very much connected to the word 7. And therefore, it's not really, shouldn't be too big of a surprise that when Shabbat is established, that is also connected to this word 7. It's all flowing out of the root words of this. The other idea that we need to unwrap here is the why. So if you read the text, thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their hosts. So we have the word completed. That word is culmination. It's Yeah, complete's just the best English word I can think of. So he completed in verse 1, and then he repeats that. God completed his work which he has done. He rested from all the work which he had done. And we have this emphasis of this was what was going on, this is what is going on. So creation, 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 completion, and rest. Why did God rest? Did God wear out?
No.
I mean, we can't do that. That idea does come from our own mind. You know, I'm exhausted. That's why I took a nap. I'm exhausted. That's why I went to bed early. I'm exhausted. That's why I fell asleep in the chair. Well, that's just an afternoon ritual. But for God, God did not need to rest.
Right.
So, from your mindset, why did he rest?
He was satisfied with what he had done.
Okay?
So 7, a lot of times in Scripture, means completion.
Yeah, or maturity, or those kind of words.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something coming full term.
Mhm.
So here, I think that's what it means, that he was happy with everything that he'd done, and he didn't feel as though he had to do anymore.
Okay, he was satisfied. He was happy with what he'd done. Mara,
Well, he did it for us because he repeated it. So
you've been listening to sermons your whole life, haven't you?
Yeah.
That's a common thing. God took rest for so we would know we were supposed to do it. He did it as an example to us. I've heard that in sermons my whole life, Joni. Same thing.
Same thing. But I was going to go into, is it fair to refer to the New Testament? Because Jesus said, God made the Sabbath, for us.
For man, yeah,
Rather than
specifically.
man for the Sabbath.
Yeah, yeah. Any other ideas on why God rested? I mean, you're getting the basic idea here. There's not a whole lot. This is not really rocket science. It is the idea that creation is completed. God has formed and filled everything.
I was gonna say, it made a pattern. It made a pattern that we can follow today.
Yeah, yeah. Now, one of the things that, just for the sake of clarification, the seventh day is Saturday, not Sunday, okay? Just so we've got that. I'm assuming we all agree with that, but we have to talk about that a little bit. As this rolls out, God is ceasing his creative work. Did God create anything else after Genesis 1? A little bit, yeah. I want to push into this a minute.
He created Adam and Eve.
Adam and Eve's already been created in the first week.
all that was created was created.
No new creations after Genesis.
Tough one.
I hear you mumbling, but I don't hear you talking.
Just thinking of the miracles that have been done. Is there any that are creative?
About parting of the Red Sea.
I would say
You
manna coming from heaven would be a creative type thing. You don't normally have bread falling out of the sky.
What about he knit me from my mother's womb?
Okay?
That's a continual.
A continuation of an original creation.
Yeah, that's.
Say no new bara.
No new bara. That is a very good statement. There's no new out of nothingness after this creative act. So when we say that God is satisfied, God is completed, God has, it's not like you and I step back from, you've been out working in the garden all day and you've got all the weeds done and you've gotten everything's watered. There's a little bit of droplets of water hanging on the little plants over there as the evening sun sets, and you step back and you go, hey, I did good, didn't I? Hey, baby, come look at this. Come look at this. Look at that. There's not a weed in that flower bed. You got them all, honey. I'm so proud of you. It's not that kind of idea. It's intriguing to me that the God who does not need to rest still rested. And you've already tapped into a little bit of the mindset of the Sabbath being made for man. Now, we want to talk about this just a little bit. Why is the Sabbath not instituted here? When is the Sabbath instituted, by the way? Does anybody know? In the law. You got to get into the book of Exodus if you want it fully established. Pretty close, Exodus chapter 20. So yeah, it's right in that area of where the formal establishment of Sabbath. Now it was, as far as a fixed institution, you find it in Exodus 20, and then a specific feature of this, in my mind, one of the things is, who are the Jews right now? There are no Jews. There are no Jews at this moment. There is Adam, there's Eve, and they were Middle Eastern. That's about all we know, whatever that meant back then, because everything got shook up with the flood, so we're not 100% certain even what that meant. I've seen people try to draw Adam and Eve with very dark complexions, with very light complexions. I have no clue, because the earth was very different before the flood. They're Edenites. That works. It does work. So instituting the idea of rest separated from Shabbat itself helps us to understand that it's not something that God just wanted for Israel, but something that God wanted for everyone. There are Israel laws that are specific to things. Fact is, one of the things that's very important to understand, in my mind, our Seventh-day Adventist friends would completely disagree with this statement, and that is, there is no requirement on any Gentile to participate or keep the Sabbath. None. That's outside of us. The Sabbath was the one of the specific commandments that was given to Israel alone. So we are outside of that. Now they'll say that, well, we are spiritual Israel. That's the phrase. We're now spiritual Israel. Well, that doesn't seem to fit either. But if I step back and I look at created order, and I'm looking at seventh and completion, seventh and resting, I get the idea of what becomes Shabbat without it being listed into a legal formula. I get the idea that rest is a good thing. I don't think any of you disagree with that statement. I mean, we have trouble finding it, but rest is a good thing. Being that God is outside of time, He's outside of our realm, we understand that God has established several things. And the world does it, and they don't even get it. They believe in creation whether they say it or not, because they get up in the morning and they go to bed at night. That's a day. Guess what you just did? Celebrate the creation of a day, which was done by God. At the end of the work week, your 7-day period, we know that there is a week. And every time a week goes by, you say the word week, you are celebrating something that God created. And the world still doesn't get it, but they talk about it all the time. So the times and seasons that man participate in are God's creation. So He helps us to mark out the 7-day work week and the idea of setting aside a day. Now, some people say that God took a day, He took a personal day on day 7. It was a day for Himself. I can't get there too much because that seems to imply Him being needy, and God never needs. So I understand what people are trying to say, but it's interesting to me that everything that God has created live their lives a day at a time except for humans.
I have a question.
I might have an answer, we'll see.
I'm sure you do. All right, we looked at Adam, and he was to tend to the garden. But until the fall, there was no sweat, there was no
Correct.
displeasure in doing this. But he was still given that seventh day to honor.
Before the fall, Adam did not get tired. That's not why the seventh day was established, because of being tired. So yeah, I mean, he wasn't sweating. He could work all day. I mean, some of y'all get up in the morning and work until 10 o'clock, and you're like, I'm done. I'm done. I can't do anything more.
So
But that's our humanity.
So that seventh day, the Lord set aside to
Absolutely.
honor the creation.
Yeah, absolutely. It is an honor of everything that God has created. We live in the rat race. Somebody said that everybody in our world is crucified between two thieves, the regrets of yesterday and the worries of tomorrow. And that's a pretty good statement. What I didn't get done yesterday bothers me, and what I need to get done tomorrow bothers me. And I get stuck in that. And ultimately, that's part of the reason we can't enjoy a day of rest, because we're dealing with both sides of that. You know, the invention, there are a few things that I in my mind, I'm going to sound bad here for just a minute, but there are a few things in my mind that I'd like to talk to God about and say, you know, you could have left that out of man's knowledge. He didn't really need that. You know, there's a few things in my list of things in my head that I just think about. And I have a love-hate relationship with it, and that's the whole idea of internet and this connected. I love it, because I can talk to people and talk to missionaries and talk to friends around the world. But man, did it make things crazy. And, you know, and now, you know, it used to take kids until they got out of high school to learn crazy. Now we give them a phone when they're 3 and they're nuts in an hour. You know, they're crazy an hour. They don't want to put it down. They're attached or drug into that world. I don't know if you guys do this or not. You know, I block out time for what I'm going to do social media-wise and looking. Because if I don't, I'm going to get on thing and I'm going down the wormhole, man. I'm there looking at this, looking at that story, watching this video, Next thing I know, I've been on the dumb phone for an hour. Doing what? Wasting time, in my mind. But, you know, it's like there's all of this stuff that fills our lives that in some way attempt to steal rest from us. Circumstances will steal rest from you. Plans will steal rest from you. There was a Chinese scholar who came to America to lecture, and while he was here, he was at a railway station, metro, that was close to the university. And the host said, if we run quickly, we can catch the next train and save ourselves 3 minutes. The scholarly just asked, and what significant thing shall we do with the 3 minutes that we have saved ourselves? That's a little too close to home, you know. You know, you get on your GPS and this is 2 minutes faster. You know, it says it right there. It's 2 minutes faster, 3 minutes faster. Now, if it's, 5, 7, 8, 10 minutes faster, it's a little, but we live with that. I can get there quicker. I can get on to the next thing. Henry David Thoreau wrote that the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. You're constantly just desperate. Constantly desperate. And since that was written so long ago, I wonder what he'd say now about people who run up escalators. You know, that's what we do. How much am I saving to run up an escalator?
Yeah, I truly feel we live in a hurry-up society. I catch myself a lot of times at work standing in front of the microwave saying, hurry up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, what did we do before we had that? I remember my mother heating up a cup of coffee on a stove, and it might take 5 or 10 minutes before everything is done.
Yep.
You know, I'm frantic after 30 seconds.
We stick our cured cup in there, pull it down, and we're like, how long is this gonna take?
Yeah.
You know? And do remember the percolator sitting on the stove,
Yes.
waiting for it to warm up enough.
Yeah, but that gives us more time to rest.
Oh.
I want you to think of this for just a second, because it's a creative act out of nothing. Not a bara out of nothing, but rest is something that God is creating by just stopping, by just pausing, if you will. And we'll, as we finish this, we'll see that He is sanctifying it. He is setting it apart as a specific thing. It is a special moment. Augustine said that thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. Our hearts are restless until we can find rest in God. So as we process this through, we got a completion. Everything is completed, including all the aliens, because it says in all their hosts. So the aliens are included in here somewhere. There are some people that believe that. I'm just saying. By the seventh day, everything is done. And then God says, verse 3, He blessed the seventh day. Now that's a new concept for us. Now we all know what the word means because we've got history on our side. But this phrase, this idea of blessing is brand new. And as we get into that, it implies all kinds of things, actually. And if we put the blessing and the sanctification together, it is something that is sacred. We could say that it is something that is spiritual. Years ago, somebody bought me a book on the blessings of rest. And then somebody handed me a book right after that that said the godliness of sleep. All these, because most people know I don't sleep much. That's just, I'm wired that way. But the idea here of a day of rest, a day of understanding that whatever I've gotten done to this point is to be celebrated, if you will, to be feeling as though that I got something done. The problem is that oftentimes we say, well, I only got this much done, or I only got this far. I wanted to get more done. But we struggle to say, I got something done. Now, some people need a kick in the pants because they say they got something done and they moved the salt shaker from the cabinet to the top of the stove. Whew, I did a lot today. That's not the idea we're getting here. But we bombard ourselves. So if this idea of setting aside a day, now, as soon as I get into this, my mind goes into the national establishment of Shabbat for Israel. My brain can't stop from going into there. But it's not a Jewish thing. It's an other than thing. Then my mind goes into blue laws. Everybody remember what blue laws are? Okay. Blue laws were usually the day of rest. Nothing was open. If you wanted to get gas, you got it on Saturday because there wasn't a gas station open on Sunday. The only places that were open on Sunday were the hospital, and even they were short-staffed, shorter than they are now. My mind goes there. So if God is establishing a day that is to be sacred and sanctified, what are the implications? What are the implications for this for you and I? Mara.
Well, when you don't do that, okay, you end up getting sick. There's a lot of things that you do to your body that it's not God's fault, it's your fault because you didn't take the time to rest.
Okay. Sometimes our physical health can be marred by a failure to do that. Jack?
I was gonna say, you know, when we fail to do something, we look at that as a failure for us. That we are the ones that's failing. We're not that we're casting blame on anybody, but that we're looking at it as the blame is on us. I didn't get this done. Why didn't I get this done? What do I gotta do to get it done? I mean, a lot of people, they procrastinate. I mean, I'm just talking about tasks that need to be done, and they just keep pushing it to the back burner, and then they're wondering why it ain't getting done. And like
Yeah.
Laura says, the stress comes, and stress is bad.
There's definitively a balance between working and resting. There's not multiple days of rest in the week. I don't know if you notice that in the creative thing. We've got 6 days of work and a day of rest. I don't necessarily think you need to work 6 days. I think that's, I'm not making that a schedule. But the idea of rest, Mara has brought up that it can affect us physically. What are some other implications of rest?
Rejuvenation in your body.
Okay, kind of a reset button on your body. Good.
How about worshiping?
Okay, worship, we could put that into there.
It's just an admission that everything I do my life doesn't depend on everything that I do.
Yeah,
There
good.
remains a Sabbath rest for the people.
Yeah. So tell me what a day of rest really looks like, practically. What was that? If I ever have one, I'll tell you. There's some truth to that.
You don't make plans.
Okay,
You don't have a timetable that day.
no timetable that day, no plans. Okay. What does rest look like?
Sleep in a little longer, maybe have your coffee and your morning breakfast and stretch it out a little longer. And, just do that the rest of the day.
Stretch things out all day, okay?
I
Ken?
don't know, maybe this should relate to it. I know when I first retired, I had a hard time to do nothing, for nothing. There was no format to my day, there was no requirement to what I did, what I didn't do, and I found that very difficult, so.
And then you got Mara's list.
Oh, yeah.
No, in all seriousness, if you get sick and you have to stay in bed, I don't know about any of y'all, but I go crazy. If you end up in the hospital with nothing to do but wait on the nurses to get around to you or whatever, that drives my mind nuts. Then I'm really thankful for the internet in that moment because my brain can do something. Jack?
Yeah, but if you ask Ken what day it is, he always tells me it's Saturday. Every day is Saturday.
Well, so let me ask you, is this day of rest intended to be formulaic? Is it a formula that we are supposed to be living by?
I think so. I really do, or the Lord wouldn't give it to us.
Okay.
Give that Sabbath day.
Okay?
Do you remember when the we'll say the blue laws and all this was, everything was a little bit more relaxing and more calmer and
Then, that's a good description, Mara.
I can disagree to a point because I don't know what everybody else is like, but Sunday morning, trying to get everybody ready and get out the door, even when I was a kid, that was not relaxing and, that was, well, yes, but,
Yeah, Sunday morning is often the devil's hour, at least getting here, especially if you've got kids at home. Every possible frustration comes out on the drive on the way to church because you've already been frustrated at home.
It's a good thing you only got a short drive now, right?
You better believe it. You better believe it. Bob?
I don't think it's a strictness that God
Okay.
demands of us, but it is for our good. The Sabbath.
That's a good way of saying it.
The
That's a,
Sabbath was made for man, and if we don't want to take advantage of it, we suffer consequences, you know?
Good point.
And that's a good way of looking at it. It's not legislative, if you will, that you must do it, but it is more than recommended for its benefits. So, you know, Sunday's a wonderful day of rest for somebody with my title attached to it. Sunday's a day of work still in some ways. Now, I don't always count it that because I love what I do and I have fun while I'm doing it, but there's a certain amount of energy that has to go into a day. So do I need to find another day of rest? Learning to rest, I think, ultimately comes, in our current mindset and our current culture, comes in short snippets. You've got to learn to rest for 5 minutes before you can learn to rest for a day. You got to, and did you hear what I said? You have to learn. In other words, it's no longer natural to take a day off. It's no longer natural to do nothing. It's no longer natural to sit around. You know, what did we do before the boob tube came out? You know, once the boob tube came out, everybody's sitting around watching TV. You know, but before that, what did we do? You know, we spent more time together. We did things together as a family. We tell our kids you need to take a nap. Well, that's for 2 reasons. One is because mom's had enough. There's the first reason a kid needs a nap. But the second reason is if they don't get a nap, they're a pain in the backside to deal with. They don't get that rest, they don't get that stopping point to kind of reset their day as far as a kid goes. We know what they get like. Guess what? It happens to adults too. Not that we get a chance to take a nap, but the more unrested we are, the more stressed we are. The more it affects our bodies physically, the more it affects our spiritual journey as well. Because what happens? I don't have time to fill in the blank because we don't know how to rest. We don't know how to. And so it's a disciplinary formula that I think can help us in our journey. I don't think that we need to legislate it or make it something other than what it is creatively as a day of rest.
I think, you're saying we don't need to legislate it, but, in a sense I agree, but, we don't want to be legalistic about it.
Okay.
Sabbath.
Well, here's the problem.
On the other hand, like some people would never rest unless you force them to,
There is truth to that.
So,
We call that sickness oftentimes.
Right.
We do.
And God, it's like, your land's supposed to have a Sabbath rest every 7 years, but they didn't do that for probably 490 years, and it's like, okay, for 70 years you're going to go, the land's going to rest.
Yep.
So.
The interesting thing to me, and it's come up quite a few times as we've been talking, this says day of rest. It just says that he rested. Now, God doesn't need to worship, but multiple times in our discussion, we've said that the seventh day, the Sabbath day, is a day of worship. We've said that, but that's not what's in the text.
Yep.
Not yet.
Right.
It will become that definitively when God legislates it for Israel. We know that, and that's why we're interchanging this. But is there something other than worship that God is trying to communicate to us here? Or could we say that by setting aside and sanctifying a day of rest is a worship experience?
Yeah.
By obedience to God, by following God's pattern, by rejuvenating, keeping our mind sharp, our body physically fit, or whatever words that come in it. When we get into the formula of Sabbath, it's going to be pretty specific. What you can and can't do. And by the time we get to Jesus being here on earth, they've created a whole other mess out of it. Because the Pharisees and all the legalists in their community have defined, how far you can walk, how many steps. If you go to one of the Jewish communities the one that I know of is in New York, that I'm thinking of. There's a rope that goes around the outer perimeter and helps them know how far they walked. Because that's all they can walk on Sabbath. They can only walk so many feet before they've worked for the day. You know, they use warming trays and things so they're not heating anything up, because that's causing work. It's causing a flame to spark. You know, if they're having a dairy Sabbath, then they can't have meat on the dairy Sabbath. If they're having a meat Sabbath, they can't have any dairy. I mean, this is what it becomes. This is what it becomes when man tries to legislate something. When man tries to take off of what God says. It's funny to me, because if we just let God speak and do that, I think we'd be all right. But we find ourselves most of the time trying to explain God by adding information into it. This is what God meant. This is what it looks like. Let me tell you how that works, type thing. And stepping back from this passage, it is incredibly convicting to me, just because of the nature of my mind, my world, my hyperactivity, and all those other things. The fact that God did not need to stop what he was doing, but he did. He didn't cease being. He's still God. Worship is still taking place in the heavenlies. That's implied in verse 1 as far as the everything that's created.
He's still holding everything together by the power of his might.
Yeah, there's still it's an other formula.
Yeah.
It's an other formula that I think is outside practically of our human understanding, because we think if I'm holding something together, it takes work. Well, for God to hold something together is nothing. You know, it's kind of like, okay, I'm just going to do this. You know, it's a direct will act of his to hold things together. But to read through this and understand that this principle of resting, did God sit down on the seventh day and reflect over everything he's done up to this point? Well, the answer to that is I don't think so, because God doesn't need to reflect. God, it's there. It's an eternity aspect. It's outside of our box of time, so it makes it very difficult for us to wrap our brain. Did God sit back and go, oh yeah, look, I did on Monday, and I did this on Tuesday, and I got this done the third day, and man, those cows, I'm not sure I made them quite right on Friday, you know, whatever. You know, did he reflect on it? I don't think so. But yet, God stopped from his labor. It was a breaking point. And I don't know how to do that. I'm going to be just blunt and honest. I really, really struggle to do nothing. You know, these days I keep my phone by my bed, because I can take verbal notes in the middle of the night of something that's going through my head. But I used to have a tablet right by the bed, because I don't know, blame it on me or blame it on the Holy Ghost. I don't care. Something would come up in the middle of the night that I wanted to remember for a sermon or something, and I had to write it down, because I may not remember it the next morning. Good, bad, or other, that's part of my world. To sit down and do nothing is very foreign to me. If I sit down, it's usually because I'm not feeling so good. I just need to physically rest. But for me to just be feeling absolutely fine and yet just sit down and do nothing is weird. It's just flat out weird. It's kind of like what Ken said when he retired. Well, I don't want to do it myself. I don't have any purpose anymore. I don't have a paycheck anymore. I don't have a 9 to 5. I don't have to punch the clock. What am I supposed to do with this idea of rest? So, in conclusion tonight, I want to ask you, what are some things that you and I can do while we are resting that are not stressful, do not cause us to put work or effort out? But what are some things that you and I can do in this topic of rest that would fit the formula, I hate to use that word here, but the idea of a rest period? What can we do? What are some ways we can better take advantage of rest? Praying, studying, praying, Reading, okay.
Just go out and enjoy, like, the world that God created.
Yeah, go take a walk. Good. Go enjoy creation.
Walk too many steps.
Yeah, don't walk too many steps, Tim.
Uh,
Because y'all got your Fitbit and you know how many steps you watched, right?
Yep.
Visit. Go spend some time with somebody. Depending on your visiting, that could be stressful or not. I think that personally, some things that I have done to try to get there, and like I said, I'm not good at this. I'm not trying to pretend, but when I have that time, I usually start that period with something, a prayer, something like, God, help me rest. Show me what rest looks like today. Because I think it's going to be different every day. God was still, if you will, holding things together. He's still, quote unquote, working, but yet he's resting. But are there things that I can do that may require some energy, but that are still restful? I think there are. I mean, I don't think you have to, okay, today's the day of rest. I'm getting the lazy boy when I get up, and I'm not getting out of the lazy boy until it's time to go to bed. Because the wife's going to not rest that day and bring all her food to you, Mara.
Can I read what my footnote says?
Sure.
God blessed the birds and fish, humans, and now the seventh day. He sanctified it, he made it holy. Thus, from the beginning of time, God placed special value on a certain day of the week.
It is. It's a special value. That's what I was meaning. I was talking about blessing being a unique thing. Up to now, things have been blessed, but not a day, as far as this idea of sanctification specifically. And I think, I don't know. Do we need blue laws again? It wouldn't hurt us, that's for sure. There are, I don't know if you've been following in the paper, but it is in Pennsylvania legislation where school systems can choose a 4-day school week. Right now, they're pursuing and evaluating a 4-day school week. Why are we looking? You're probably right. It's probably the NEA somewhere. But it's interesting to me that, companies, corporations look for times to give people rest within the upper echelon type people, usually not the plebes down on the work line. The executives, get a rest retreat because they work so hard. But corporately, the idea is there. We're seeing it pop up in academia. I think we can easily see it humanly that we just need rest sometimes. We just need to rest more often. You say, Pastor, that was the longest discussion on rest I've ever heard. I am now stressed. I hope it's somewhat exhausting, because then you'll rest. After I recovered from my broken neck and I was doing a little bit of preaching, teaching circuits, one of the things that I used to say is, don't wait until God puts you on your back to look up. And there's a lot of truth to that when it comes to this idea of rest. Don't wait until you break to stop. And I know it's hard. Oh, brothers and sisters, I know it's hard. But we need to encourage each other in that. It's part of the reason that we have such high anxiety in our cultures, because we don't know how to rest, and our minds think we can never rest. That's part of the dictate of our understanding. So next week, we begin to look at is Genesis chapter 2 and Genesis chapter 1 contradictory, compatible, or continuate? So we'll look at as far as Genesis chapter 2. And within Genesis chapter 2, as we've talked about, we'll talk about the first covenant. We'll talk about the first home. We'll talk about creative order and why complementarian design is God's pattern for that. It's all wrapped up in Genesis chapter 2. that crazy? It's all wrapped up in creative order. Some of the things that you and I are arguing about in culture and butting our heads up against in society are creative issues.
Right.
We moved so far beyond biblical creation, and that's why we have the mess that we're living in. But
Men
anyway,
and women are different.
men and women are very different, and not just physiologically.
Yeah.
I'm going to pray, but don't run away. Guys, we need some help. We've got to take off a couple rows of chairs. Speaking of resting, you're not resting now. We've got to get several guys around the piano. But first, let me pray, and then I'll tell you what we're going to do. Because the girls are like, he didn't say me, I'm done. Let me pray. God, thank you for showing us what we should do, even though we don't do it. Help us, Father, to find those moments of rest, if nothing else. Help us to understand that you set aside, you sanctified, you made it special. Help us to learn to do those things with our time of rest, whatever that looks like. And in those moments of rest, may we, even as we started tonight singing, may we be still and know that you are God. Thank you. Thank you for guiding us back to this creation study and showing us how much it really would benefit our world if we just lived by it. Help us as we go into our week to serve you faithfully, to be diligent, but also to take rest. We thank you in Christ's name. Amen. So girls, you can listen in. Guys, this is what we got to do. We got to take the first row here off completely, or at least stack to here.